My name is Martha, and I am 105 years old. Most people look at me and see a miracle of medicine, or perhaps just a very old, very tired woman sitting in a wooden armchair. But I have spent 80 years hiding a truth that has turned my heart into a graveyard. I've never said this out loud. Not to my daughters, not to my sisters when they were alive, and certainly not to the man I spent 6 decades of my life with. But as the shadows get longer in this room, the weight of the unsaid is becoming too much to bear. The truth is, I spent my entire life building a family with a man I didn't love. I didn't hate Richard. He was a decent man, a hard worker, and a gentle father. But I married him for the safety of a roof and the comfort of a known name. I married for the peace of a quiet life, and in doing so, I suffocated the fire that was meant to burn within me. I chose the shade because I was afraid of the sun, and now, at the end of it all, I realize that the shade is just a colder way to die. There was a moment, a single Tuesday afternoon in 1948, that locked the rest of my life into place. I had a choice to make, and I chose the path that wouldn't make anyone whisper. I thought I was being a good girl. I didn't realize I was signing a life sentence. After the war, the world felt like it was made of glass. Everything had been shattered, and we were all desperate to glue the pieces back together into something that resembled a home. Richard was a steadying hand. He was a mechanical engineer, a man who believed in blueprints and logic. He smelled like cedarwood and old paper. When he proposed, I didn't feel my heart skip a beat. I didn't feel that wild, terrifying rush of blood that I'd felt with a boy named Julian 2 years prior. Instead, I felt a sense of relief. I told myself that passion was a luxury for people in movies, and that a good match was about shared values and a clean kitchen. We lived in a house with a white picket fence, literally. It was 1952, and I was the picture of a happy wife. I wore the printed aprons. I polished the silver until I could see my own hollow expression in the spoons. My life was a series of small, rhythmic comforts. Monday was wash day. Wednesday was the butcher. Saturday was the cinema and a shared ginger ale. I remember the sound of Richard's footsteps on the gravel driveway every evening at 5:15. I'd stand at the stove, stirring the gravy, and I'd feel a tightness in my chest. It wasn't excitement. It was the feeling of a door closing. I was a good wife. I kept the house spotless. I raised 3 children who never went to bed hungry. I hosted the bridge club, and I nodded when the other women talked about their blessings. From the outside, I had everything. I had the stability that millions of women would have traded their souls for. But inside, I was a ghost. I was a woman who went through the motions of intimacy like a chore. Someone who laughed at jokes I didn't find funny just to keep the water still. I thought this was the price of maturity. I didn't know I was paying with the only currency that actually matters. The first hairline crack. It happened on our 10th anniversary. Richard had taken me out to a quiet restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and heavy velvet curtains. He had bought me a pearl necklace, beautiful, expensive, and perfectly sensible. As he fastened the clasp at the back of my neck, he leaned in and whispered, "To another 50 years of this, Martha. We have a good life, don't we?" I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the restaurant. I saw the pearls. I saw the expensive dress. And I saw a woman who looked like she was waiting for a train, that was never going to come. The question hit me like a physical blow. Is this it? Is this the sum of a human life? Being fine? I wanted to turn around and say, Richard, do you even know what my favorite color is? Do you know that I cry in the garden because the dirt is the only thing that feels real? Do you know that I'm lonely even when you're holding my hand? But I looked at his kind, earnest face. He was a man who did everything right. He didn't deserve a wife who was unsatisfied with perfect. So I just touched the pearls, felt their coldness against my skin, and said, Yes, Richard, we have a very good life. That was the first time I felt the crack. It was small, a tiny fissure in the foundation of my existence. I realized that night that I wasn't living a life. I was maintaining a museum. I stayed awake for hours after he fell asleep, listening to his steady, rhythmic breathing, and realized that the good life I had chosen was actually a very comfortable cage. Year after year, the crack grew wider, but I learned how to wallpaper over it. That's the thing about a life built on comfort. It's very easy to stay busy enough to forget you're empty. I became a master of the small talk marriage. We lived in the same house for decades, but we were like two ships docked in the same harbor that never actually shared a cargo. I knew his coffee order, black, 1 sugar. I knew he liked his socks rolled, not folded. I knew the exact sound his key made in the lock. But I didn't know what he dreamt about when he talked in his sleep. And I realized, with a cold shiver one morning, that he didn't know a single thing about the woman living inside my skin. There is a specific kind of loneliness that only exists within a marriage. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being seen, but not known. I remember the missed moments, the times he'd reach for my hand while we watched the evening news, and I'd find an excuse to get up and check the oven. The times he'd try to tell me about a frustration at the office, and I'd give him a practiced hollow, "That's nice, dear," because listening felt like it required an emotional energy I simply didn't have for him. I was saving all my energy just to keep the facade from crumbling. The cost of my comfort was a slow, steady erosion of my personality. I stopped painting, which I used to love, because Richard thought it was messy. I stopped listening to the jazz records Julian had once shown me, because Richard preferred the silence or the drone of the weather report. I traded my vibrancy for his peace. I watched my children grow up in a house where there was no shouting, but there was also no heat. They learned that love was a series of polite gestures. They saw a mother who was always there and a father who provided, and they thought that was the goal. It breaks my heart now to realize I taught them to settle for fine before they even knew what magic felt like. I am 105, and most of my memories are like old faded Polaroids, but there is one that stays sharp, as if it happened this morning. It was a Tuesday in late October 1965. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. Richard was away on a business trip in Chicago, one of the few times I was truly alone in the house. I was standing at the kitchen window watching the yellow leaves from the maple tree scratch against the glass. I was wearing a housecoat that was a shade of blue I hated, but it had been a gift from my mother-in-law. The phone rang. It was a voice I hadn't heard in nearly 20 years. It was Julian. He was passing through town, he said, just for a night. He asked if he could come by for a cup of coffee, just to say hello, just to see how the years had treated me. My heart didn't just beat. It hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. For 10 minutes I stood in that kitchen, paralyzed. I looked at the polished silver. I looked at the framed photo of Richard and me on the mantel, the one where we both looked so stiff, so correct. I could have said yes. I could have seen him. But the weight of my comfortable life, the weight of the good girl I had been for so long, was too heavy. I was terrified that if I saw him, if I smelled the tobacco and rain sand I remembered so clearly, the walls of my museum would come crashing down. I was afraid I'd realize that safe was just another word for wasted. I told him no. I told him I was busy with the children. I told him I hoped he was well. I hung up the phone with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried, not for Julian, but for the girl who had been so afraid of a little bit of chaos that she chose a lifetime of boredom. I sat there until the room went dark, the smell of the roast I'd forgotten in the oven filling the house, reminding me of my duties. I never told Richard. I never told anyone. That unsent message, that unaccepted invitation, it sits in my gut like a stone even a century later. I chose the blue housecoat. I chose the roast. I chose the safety. And I have regretted it every single day since. Clarity rarely comes like a thunderstorm. For me, it arrived like a pilot light going out in the middle of a cold night. It was 1994. Richard was 72, and I was 71. We had been married for 46 years. He was sitting in his usual wing-back chair, the one with the frayed piping on the arms that I'd promised to fix for a decade. He was reading the paper, and I was knitting a sweater for our grandson. The house was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic click-click of my needles and the occasional rustle of newsprint. Suddenly, the paper slipped. It hit the floor with a soft thud. I looked up, expecting him to grumble about his glasses or reach for his tea. But he just sat there. His chin was tucked into his chest, and his eyes were half open, staring at nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my knitting. I just sat there for a long minute, watching the light from the floor lamp glint off his bald spot. In that silence, the most horrific thought I've ever had crossed my mind. I didn't think, oh God, not my husband. I thought, is it finally over? He had suffered a massive stroke. He didn't die that night, but the man who was Richard, the man of blueprints and cedarwood, was gone. He spent the next 3 years in a hospital bed, set up in our dining room. I became his nurse. I wiped his chin. I changed his linens, and I whispered, "It's okay," into his ear when he grew frustrated. One evening, shortly before the end, he regained a moment of lucidity. He took my hand with a strength I didn't know he had left. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound, watery sadness. "Martha," he wheezed, "I'm so sorry." I asked him what he was sorry for. I thought he meant the mess, the burden of his care, the medical bills. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "that I wasn't enough to make you stay awake." He knew. All those years. I thought I was the one making the sacrifice, the one performing the grand act of endurance. But he had lived in that cold house too. He had felt the distance. He had seen the way I pulled back. He had spent 46 years being comfortable with a woman who was only half present. And in that moment, I realized my sacrifice had been a form of cruelty to him, too. He died 2 days later, and when the funeral was over and the casseroles had been finished, I sat in that house alone. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy. It was the sound of a wasted century. People tell you that grief is about missing someone, but for me, the aftermath was about the sudden, terrifying presence of myself. With Richard gone, I didn't have to be the good wife anymore. I didn't have to keep the house at 68 degrees or have dinner on the table by 6. But when I reached for the freedom I'd supposedly been craving, I found that my hands were atrophied. I had spent so long living for comfort and duty that I had no idea what I actually liked. I'd go to the grocery store and stand in the produce aisle for 20 minutes, paralyzed, because I didn't know what kind of fruit I wanted. I only knew what Richard liked. I'd sit in the living room and turn off the TV, and the quiet would start to scream. Loneliness isn't just being alone. It's the physical sensation of your own life having no witness. I'd cook a single egg for dinner and eat it over the sink because setting a table for one felt like a joke. I'd look at the phone, but who was there to call? My friends were mostly dead, or tucked away in homes where they repeated the same 3 stories. I started taking long walks, further than I used to. I'd look at the young couples in the park, the ones arguing or kissing or crying, and I'd feel a flare of jealousy so hot it made me dizzy. I wanted to shake them. I wanted to grab that young woman by her shoulders and say, "Fight with him. Be miserable. Be ecstatic. Just don't be fine. Don't choose the man who makes you feel safe if he doesn't also make you feel alive." I spent my 80s and 90s in a state of quiet observation. I watched the world change. I watched the internet happen, and cell phones, and the way people talk about self-love now. Part of me thinks it's all a bit much, but another part of me, the girl who wanted to see Julian in 1965, weeps with envy at the permission people give themselves today to be happy. Now at 1:05, my routine is simple. I wake up, I drink tea, and I wait. The house is gone. I'm in a facility now. It's clean, it's white, and it's very, very comfortable. It is the ultimate version of the life I chose, and I hate it. Every time a nurse smiles at me and says, "Are you comfortable, Martha?" I want to scream. I don't want to be comfortable. I want to have been loved. I want to have been known. I know why you're listening to this. You're looking for a reason to stay or a reason to go. You're sitting in a car or lying in bed or hiding in a bathroom at work, and you're wondering if that settled feeling in your stomach is maturity or if it's a warning. You think you have time. That's the great lie of youth. You think that if you just get through the next 5 years, or the next 10, or until the kids are grown, that then you'll start living. You think that safety is the foundation you build a life on. But I am standing at the very end of the line, looking back, and I am telling you, safety is a beautiful shroud. It's a velvet-lined coffin. If you are with someone because they are nice, but your soul goes quiet when they enter the room, leave. If you are staying because it would be too much trouble to start over, start over. The trouble of a divorce or a breakup is nothing compared to the trouble of a century spent wondering what if. I look at my hands now. They are translucent, like old parchment. I have so little time left. A few months, maybe a few days. And when I go, what will I take with me? Not the house. Not the bank account, not the good reputation I worked so hard to keep. I'll take the memory of Julian's voice on the phone. I'll take the memory of the way the light looked on the day I didn't say what I felt. I'll take a heart that is mostly intact because it was never truly used. don't be like me. Don't leave this world with a pristine heart. Leave it battered, leave it scarred, leave it exhausted from loving too much and too loudly. I wonder, as you listen to an old woman's regrets, is there a name that popped into your head while I was talking? Is there a face you see when you close your eyes? One that isn't the person sitting in the next room? If there is, don't wait until you're 105 to say it. I've spent 80 years in a comfortable bed, but I haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since 1948. My time is very short now. The nurses will be in soon with my evening tea, and I'll give them that same polite, empty smile I gave Richard for 60 years. I'll be comfortable until the very end. That is my punishment. If this meant something to you, perhaps you could tell me. Have you ever stayed somewhere just because it was easier than leaving? I'd like to know I'm not the only one who got lost in the quiet. Goodbye, and please, don't wait.